Hello all, welcome to lesson 24 of the Queen versus Rook endgame. Many times people ask if this endgame is really that important. So I want to show you from the practical perspective how I think this endgame is very underrated, especially if you are playing the weak side with the Rook. Let's first see this example from the a theoretical endgame from Rook and pawn versus rook. In this situation, the rook pawn is the h pawn, but this also happens with the a pawn. And so the theory says that the attacking side should cut the king on the fifth file, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then move up the pawn until the last rank. So let's start with that. Moving the pawn, the rook moves. I'll go with the king. The rook cuts the king from moving away. I advance the pawn one more time. The king now starts to control the coming back of our rook. This is all theory. Now the rook attacks the pawn, and so we reach this position. And it seems like white can force it, but because we will have time from the distance that we have cut the king, this is all theory. I'm not going to deal too much about the rook and pawn and game. So now the king approaches. I will go to the last rank. The king keeps approaching. I attack the rook moves away. I now bring the king, the rook gives a check. Here I can't progress because the rook simply will give a lot of checks, and if the king moves away from the pawn, then it will take the pawn. So the king is forced to go to the last rank to the other side. And now another check. The king needs to move, and now we are threatening mate. Okay, so now the technique will bring us to the queen versus rook endgame. How? We give a check, the king moves, and here is the key move. We give another check, the king takes the rook, and now we can promote our pawn with check. So we promote it to queen, and now it's check. So you saw from a theoretical endgame from rook and pawn versus rook. This happens a lot if the pawn is on the h or a file. This happens a lot. So if you are advanced and you are already studying this endgame, you know for sure that this will end in a queen versus rook endgame. And so just think of it. If is going to end in a queen versus rook endgame, the more I know about it, either from the attacking side or from the defensive side, it's always useful to know a lot about how to manage it. Because most of the times, and I will show you in this lesson examples from practical games, most of the times we promote to queen, and then the other side resigns the game, thinking, okay, it's a queen versus rook in the game, it's over. So no need to add, but because they are not as informed about how hard it is to play a queen versus rook in the game. So coming back here, and now we can play the end game. I just show you this example. I give a check, the king moves. I'll cut the king from the rook tries to approach, and now this is just technique. Okay, we are now in a second rank defense. Black goes into wishbone. We have covered this all in previous lessons. Now it's a decent defense and so on. So, but the purpose today is not to show how to win the queen versus rook end game, but show you examples coming from theoretical end games like the one we saw now, or practical games. So now let's move on for an example coming from a real game. This game was played a long time ago. I brought examples from the 1880 year or last century, from the beginning of last century and so on. So these are not recent examples, but there are also recent examples. For example, I remember one game between Nepomniachtchi and Magnus Carlsen that Magnus was with the rook, Nepomniachtchi. They were in trouble, of course, but they were not able. Nepomniachtchi was not able to win the end game, and everyone was okay. Magnus Carlsen is a god, but basically they are not as comfortable as playing this end game, and Magnus forced Nepomniachtchi to prove it in the practical play, and it was not possible, and it ended in a draw. So this game, we attack the rook. This is also coming from rook and pawn versus rook and game. And as you will see, this is practical moves from a real game that happened. Okay. We are just trying to bring our pawn to promotion, but from this point, it seems hard because the rook is controlling the last square. So we need to bring it closer. And now, just a brilliant move. We simply sacrifice the rook, white takes the rook, and now we promote it, we check. What happened in the game? It moves, we give another check, and white quit. So another example from a practical example where the rook player didn't want to continue. So, but if it was us to play, of course, if you had the rook, we would force the queen player to prove it, of course. Another example from another game. This is, as you see, with more pawns. Again, a rook and pawn versus rook and pawn end game. This is a 3 versus 2 end game. Black to play. Black gives a check. They exchange the pawns. Now the pawn advances. We are threatening to promote to queen. Okay, the queen, our king takes the rook, check. The king moves, and now pay attention to this detail. Really pay attention to this detail. The white side is going to be very clever. The queen gives a check, attacking the last pawn and the king. The king moves, and the queen makes a huge mistake. It takes the pawn. The king moves, and now no, the mistake will be now. Sorry, and now it approaches the king. What happens is the king is caged. It can't escape here, and so the white player just gave this check, and it was a draw. Why? Because the king can't really escape an eternal checks. So be careful, because just 2 moves away, this was a win for black. This was also from a practical example. Always pay attention. Another example, again from rook and pawns versus rook and pawns endgame. This is a 2 versus 2 endgame. Of course, it attacks the rook comes, goes for the pawn, white player exchange 1 pawn. Now it will try to advance the pawn. This is theory. Now the rook seems to be in danger, and it will be an easy draw, but no. Just sacrifice the rook, and again, we have a queen versus rook in the game. The rook is attacked, but what did the black player did on the game? He resigned. Again, he didn't force white to prove it. And of course, if it was us, it will be harder for the white player. Another example from the game. Now, this is another end game that can end up in a queen versus rook end game. In this situation, rook versus pawn end game. White player gives a check. Now the king approaches one of these pawns, and now it advances the other. And easy. The rook takes 1 pawn, and we have another queen. And again, the player with the rook resigned the game. So you see how many times it happens in practical play. And we are covering just old games, of course, classical old games. But if you go for rapid, for blitz, and so on, I'm sure you'll find a lot of more situations where the weak player doesn't force the strong player to prove it knows the technique. Again, and just to finish, a final example. Another example of rook and pawns against rook and pawn. In this situation, it's a bit interesting because the side with just one pawn will have the queen. It attacks one pawn. The rook defends the other, intending to promote. But then it's a check. Moves the queen. Moves the king. The rook pins the pawn, so the pawn can't now move. It moves the king, and now ta-da! Sacrifice the rook. The rook takes, and we are again in an end game, queen versus rook. And what has done the rook side? It resigned again. So I will post the starting positions of all these examples in the description. And if you want, I suggest you to try to win from the queen versus rook position. It's a good exercise. But basically, my intention was to show you how important is to the information to be a better player. Hope you have enjoyed, and I see you again, probably in different lessons, but hope you stick around and have fun with the channel. See you.